Hello again. Okay, so let's look at Genesis. I believe around the 5th chapter talks about the sons of God came down and saw the daughters of men and came down and shilly-shally happened. And people have built up theories around this. I believe the Bible, but we're going to look at one of these theories. So some people say all flesh was corrupted. And some people say, they were introducing genetic experiments, which is possible. I mean, creatures who helped with, or at least witnessed the world being created, knowing something about genetics, being able to manipulate genetics would make sense. Again, Bible doesn't give a lot of details. Now, some people have gone as far to say that mythical creatures were being created. And saw a video recently, a guy talking about centaurs were made. Now, I'm willing to jump back and say, okay, so let's suppose they were manipulating genes, which is possible. So what happens is we do all this stuff, God destroys the world with a flood. Then stories get passed down afterwards. After the flood, people start talking about what happened in the past. And someone says, look, they were combining horse and man. And then the next generation comes around and tells the story over again. Then the next generation comes around and someone's like, what would this look like? And they draw a picture. So were we actually creating centaurs, or were we just combining horse and man DNA and other people interpreted it as centaurs? That's a bigger question. What would it take? So I decided to look at Centaur Anatomy. I'm not going to go into the genetics on this because I'm not a geneticist. But just looking at the Centaur Anatomy, and then we can take a step back and say what kind of genetics would go into making this. Now I am going to say we have combined DNA from two different species before. The infamous fish strawberry hybrids. People wanted a way to preserve strawberries in the winter. They found a gene in fish which allowed them to survive colder temperatures, and so they tried to put them into strawberries. And I think tomatoes also, but strawberries is the main one. And they succeeded. Now, these were never commercially done or anything, so, the whole idea, we are eating genetic, mutant strawberries, no. We stopped doing this. This was back in the early 70s, I think around 73 to 75. Out of 138 attempts, 3 of them succeeded. So there you go. We're getting, less than 2.5%. This is one of the reasons they aren't doing it, or they didn't do it on a mass scale, because it just wasn't very successful. Looked up a little about genetics. So 1856 to 1863 is when Gregor Mendel was doing his experiments and formed the basis of genetics, or what is considered the basics for genetics, modern genetics. 1869, Friedrich Miescher discovers DNA. 1944, Oswald Avery and a team of researchers connected DNA to heredity. So that's where, genes are connected to DNA, and they got into that. Then 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick first mapped or modeled, or however you want to put it, DNA. So we're going from 53 to the early 70s, about 20 years from having it mapped out to being able to extract DNA from a fish and put it into a strawberry and have it succeed. 2.5% success rate is actually sort of impressive if you look at it that way. Now we also, in the 90s, around 95 I think, we get into the let's manipulate genes so fruit flies, their eyes appear on their wings or on their antennas or on their legs. And supposedly this was done earlier. Russian scientists, I tried to find it, couldn't, basically just irradiated fruit flies and fruit fly eggs and whatever, and had this result come out. But in the 90s, we started doing it on purpose just to see if we could, how this actually works. And yes, you can find this on the internet and get information about it. So we know we can mix and match DNA from different animals or different species, even plant and animal. And we know we can scramble DNA so that eyes appear in weird places. Is that the same as making a human torso pop out of a horse's neck? And like I said, not a geneticist, I can't answer that question. But we are going to look at just the general Centaur anatomy and guess how well would this have worked. Speculate. What kind of genetics would we have to do? And it's the sort of thing, man probably will not be able to. Could a angelic being who witnessed creation do it? That's another question. Okay, so let's start with the basic shape. First off, male and female centaurs do exist. Females are rarely, or were considered to exist. I'm not going to say do exist. Females were rarely mentioned because male-dominated world. So I'm not going to go into the whole reproductive system just because now we're talking about two different types of centaurs and, more anatomy. And I think we don't have to go that deeply into it just to make the point. So basic structure then. We got basically the horse's shoulders, they're, I guess what some people might call the hips for their front legs. They're usually referred to as shoulders, are sort of the same place where a man's hips would be. And basically, waist down, we're going down, springing into it. So, do we have the shoulder doing double duty? Do we have two sets of bones? Do we have a weird hybrid bone which acts as a horse's shoulder and a man's hip? Do we just do away with the man's hip altogether because we don't really need it as much? I'm thinking we either probably need two sets of bones which are designed to work together, or we have created some weird hybrid bone which can act as both a man's hips and a horse's shoulder and not affect utility of the man or the horse. So again, what kind of genetics would be involved in creating this either hybrid bone or two sets of bones or whatever? And that's an answer, for someone else to answer, question for someone else to answer, because I'm not a geneticist. But we are, obviously getting to the point where we do have to start messing deeply into genetics. We've got the whole man's abdomen is going down into the horse's chest muscles, or do we have two sets of muscles? Do we have muscles which are acting double duty? Same issue with the hips or with the bones. So we got to look at that. The area where it all connects is where we start to get into creating stuff that we don't need, or that we might need, or questioning whether we need it or not. It's like I said, this is very speculative, so I'm allowed to answer all three versions, or mention the possibility of all three versions. Then we start. Let's start to look at like the body systems. So the circular pulmonary, or heart-lung system. We look at it in school. We learn them as two separate: the circulatory system and the respiratory system. but cardiopulmonary. That's the word I was looking for. Doctors recognize they are linked very closely. They do two completely different things, but their functions are interact enough to consider it one system. So how do we do this? The horse's lungs are needed, definitely, I think. Because if we're going to be doing horse-like activities, we need large lungs, as well as the horse's heart is needed. Because same difference, we need to be able to pump the blood in force at times. Just dealing with the horse part. Are the human lungs and heart necessary? And if they aren't necessary, what's in the chest cavity? Is this just a bunch of extra muscle, or do we have a secondary heart / secondary set of lungs? Now, my lungs are attached to my mouth through the trachea, bronchial tubes, or trachea. It's 4 or 5 inches. So when I breathe, air gets to my lungs fairly quickly. Horse is somewhat similar. It's a little longer. Centaur, if I am relying on the horse's lungs only, but I'm breathing through my mouth and nostrils, I've got to have a long trachea going down this whole length. And the air's got to get there. There's either got to be a system in which the air can make it there and I'm not overly dependent on the air, or perhaps we have a secondary system in my chest. So my chest is sort of giving the immediate oxygen, but the horse lungs are doing their job for the horse part of it all. Because again, the horse's body is going to need more oxygen than the human body. So perhaps maybe there is a second set of lungs. Are there 2 tracheas, or do we have it sort of feeding off the same one and it's got a little branch off that goes to the human lungs and then the rest runs down to the horse's lungs? And of course, how does this run? I skipped over the spine altogether because most people can imagine, okay, the spine goes down and just runs down the man's back and then runs down along the horse's back. Probably this hybrid hip bone thing would probably have some structure to allow for the bend in the spine. But now we have the trachea running the same length, basically, or part of the length at least. And it's got to make this almost 90-degree turn to get from the human body to the horse body and then into the horse lungs. So that's something to consider. And again, like I said, same with the heart. I can see the possibility of 2 hearts. They would still be hooked together to the same vein system, because having a separate vein system, I think, would give rise to more chances for accidents. So I think they would be, could the human heart support the horse body if something happened to the horse heart? Not fully. It could possibly supplement it until the horse heart got a little better. But, so we do need both circulatory systems to be functional, but I think they would be tied together in some way, so we would have a somewhat backup as necessary. But that backup wouldn't be super impressive. Now then, digestion, similar thing here. We got, now, interesting thing here is we've done away with the human ability to eliminate waste. So we are 100% dependent on the horse's rear end to get rid of waste. So do we need a human stomach? Do we need a horse stomach? And again, to support, probably the horse's stomach is big enough to support the nutrient needs of at least the horse portion of it. But if we don't have a human stomach, what's going on in our abdomens, the human part abdomen at least? Or is that just extra muscle? And again, the esophagus has to run. Does the esophagus branch off into the human stomach and then continue to go back to the horse? Because the horse stomach is still dependent on the human mouth to eat. Now we could get into stuff like what does it eat? And so we have a human stomach which can process meat, and the horse stomach which can process grass. So maybe we could get into an argument for two stomachs. We would of course be eating the grass through the human mouth, so the teeth would have to be different to grind the grass up properly. That's acceptable. Now, I mentioned stomachs. I didn't mention intestines or colon or stuff like that, which are humans and horses both have. So would there be, again, a human intestine system to break down the stuff that's going to the human stomach, and a horse intestinal system to break down the grass and stuff? Both of them have to be tied into the rectum in some way. So would they be 100% separate? Would there be another tube running the length of the horse's body just to get the human waste down to the horse rectum? Don't know. I mean, it's something we would have to consider. And then looking again back to the genetics, are we going to create this system with two tracheas, two esophaguses, two intestine systems, and tie them together somehow, or not? Same goes with the kidneys. Do we have human kidneys? Because the human kidneys are down close to where we would be tied into the horse. So it's possible. I think we probably could do away with the human kidneys just because, one, we would need more space for the muscles to be tied into the horse. And two, I think the horse's kidneys could handle what the human kidneys do, as well as what the horse kidneys do. We still have to have some link up to get the, again, it's all basically blood vessels which are depositing waste into the kidneys and then, mixing it with water. So that I can actually see the kidneys, us working off of horse kidneys alone, unlike other organs where we would probably need a horse version and a human version working somehow in sync with each other. I think the kidneys would work. And that's about it. Like I said, this is all speculative. Could it happen? And then if it did happen, what kind of genetics would have to go into mixing and matching to make this work? Which again, that's something even someone trained in genetics would have trouble formulating, I think. Which something that saw the universe being made and saw, oh, this is how it works, might be able to do. That is it. Like I said, fully speculative. Don't believe in centaurs myself. And like I said, I left out the whole reproductive system altogether just because now we're talking with two sets of things and two different animals. That's it. Have a nice day.